Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gamer into the video. Let's discuss GTA 5 Xbox One versus PS4 graphics comparison. So we've already done a basic frame rate test from the beginning of the game, which is linked in this article. We're going to be finishing that off over the next few days when we've gotten just a few more missions in. And we'll discuss that towards the end of what we've found so far. And we've also put together, of course, a foliage comparison, which does expand significantly on what I'm about to discuss in this particular video. All of that is linked in the article, which is a rather lengthy comparison, which of course includes lots of screenshots and other goodies. So you might want to check that out. It's linked in the video description. Anyway, on with the show. So both the X1 and PS4 versions are running a native frame buffer of 1080p, and it's pretty much easy to tell the difference compared to the previous generation. Now, the previous title, of course, X360 and PS3, had a lot of issues when it came to pop-in and performance problems, and it wasn't just the fault of the rendering time, it was also the fact that most of the data had to be streamed from the disk. And because of that, performance penalties and pop-in, as I said, were pretty prevalent. Now, it's not too much of a problem. There is still some pop-in. You will still notice the oddity of, say, for example, a shop suddenly coming alive as a light pop on, and you might even notice things such as, say, hubcap wheels appearing. But it's by no means as bad as it was in the previous generation. It's still not perfect. You will still notice that, for all intents and purposes, it is still the Rage engine, which, of course, stands for Rockstar Advanced Game Engine. Anyway, there are other things that we need to discuss. Regards PS4, X1, God rays, depth of field, realistic reflections, all of that stuff is pretty much interchangeable between the two versions. Personally, I have noticed the PS4 does have ever so slightly more lighting than the X1. It is not substantial, and you really do have to notice it by really kind of putting your eyes close to the screen and looking, particularly at night, with like loads of neon signs. You might notice it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's very hard to spot. When it comes, however, to plant life, fauna, that, however, isn't difficult to spot. We have mentioned this in another video, and indeed it is on this channel. It's also linked in the article if you have difficulty finding it. There's a significant difference in certain areas with lots of foliage between the PS4 and X1. It's basically, to summarize, you could say that PS4 version not only has a larger variety of fauna that's shown on screen simultaneously, but it's also far denser, which does make it look a bit more natural. However, neither version is exactly realistic. It's not exactly, say, Far Cry 4 here. There are still definite issues with the foliage on both versions. It can look a little bit like it's made from paper mache at times. It's not quite what you'd expect. Regarding textures, there's definitely a rather large improvement over the previous generation. And for the most part, I can't really see any difference between texture resolution from either PS3 or 360. PS4 or X1. I have looked. But it seems to be pretty much the same. It's a real shame that there doesn't appear to be any decent level of anisotropic filtering. If you're looking at certain textures from acute angles, this is really noticeable. And even things such as, say, dirt and that type of stuff can look a little bit washed out and not quite what you'd expect, to be totally and utterly honest with you. As I mentioned earlier regarding the lighting, it all looks really impressive if you're driving through streets at night. There is some of that in this video. Headlights reflect as you would expect. You've got lens flare, volumetric lighting, and all of the other stuff that you would expect in a title. It's not quite a next generation. There is still some issues here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty nice. I've got to say, it does look rather impressive. As for frame rate, I do need to discuss it just briefly. There are times where the frame rate can dip if you're really in busy intersections. So far, from my earlier testing, PS4 does hold out slightly better than the Xbox One. It's not a massive difference by any stretch of the imagination. It's just slight. But we'll be finishing that off, as I said, over the next few days. Now, I know some people are probably going to be disappointed that the title didn't manage to achieve 60 FPS as opposed to, say, Last of Us Remastered, but you've got to remember that Last of Us Remastered, the actual world itself of slew, if you will, is a lot smaller. In other words, the environments are nowhere near as large compared to, say, the open city and urban environments of GTA. And so because of that, obviously it's putting the whole system under increased load. So my personal opinion on GTA 5 on the PS4 versus Xbox One, neither exactly is perfect. There are definitely issues. They'll pop up, for example, on both versions that you will notice. There are still issues of the previous generation, which you can definitely tell. It's not, as I've mentioned in the very article, this is not like a rebuilding of the entire game for the next generation. Instead, you should think of it as a remaster, and that's the kindest way to think of this. Just like The Last of Us, just like a couple of other games that we could definitely mention, you know, runs more stable frame rate at a higher resolution, there are better quality assets, and there are improved, of course, visual fidelity. But the engine itself at the core is not, you know, completely new. For example, this was used for, say, Max Payne 3 and Red Dead Redemption and so on. So as I said, it looks pretty impressive. And if you do want the absolute best version so far, the PS4 does have the slight nod. It does have ever so slightly better foliage. It has ever so slightly better lighting, and we are talking minuscule here, and slightly better performance. But really, if you're an Xbox One owner, you're going to be pretty damn happy as well. Anyway, as I said, check out the article if you need more thoughts and opinions. But for now, take care and bye for now.